Deep in the ancient mountains of Cherokee territory, where mist clings to centuries-old forests, the Tsalagi people have kept their warrior traditions alive far from the world's prying eyes. For generations, the Shadow Clan has preserved their ancestral combat arts, passing down skills that made their ancestors some of the most feared warriors in history. They live quietly, but they've never forgotten how to fight. When the Azteca Cartel crosses into their sacred lands, they see only what they expect to see. An isolated Native American community, another easy target in their expansion north. They don't notice the eyes watching from the treeline, or the way the forest itself seems to whisper warnings. They don't realize that this ground has been defended by master warriors for over 400 years. What's about to unfold isn't just a territorial dispute. It's a lesson written in blood about why some lands should remain untouched, and why the deadliest predators are often the ones you never see coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Morning mist rolled through the valley as John Blackwolf traced his fingers over ancient petroglyphs carved into the cave wall. At 62, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who had spent his life protecting these sacred grounds, just as his father and grandfather had done before him. The morning light filtered through the cave entrance, casting long shadows across symbols that told stories of warriors and battles long past. Behind him, soft footsteps approached, the kind that would be silent to most ears. "The scouts have returned," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had made her the youngest leader in the clan's combat training program. At 28, she embodied both the old ways and the new, equally comfortable with traditional tracking methods and modern tactical analysis. John turned to face his daughter, noting the tension in her usually composed features. "Show me," he said simply, following her out into the crisp mountain air. The Shadow Clan's territory spread out before them. 3,000 acres of pristine forest and mountains that had been their home since before the European settlers arrived. The training grounds below buzzed with activity. Young warriors moved through ancient forms with modern weapons, their movements a fluid blend of traditional Cherokee combat techniques and contemporary martial arts. The clan had never stopped training, never forgotten their warrior heritage. While the outside world saw only a peaceful Native American community, the Shadow Clan maintained a fighting force that could rival any special operations unit. Sarah led her father to the command center, disguised as a traditional meeting house. Inside, modern surveillance equipment shared space with ceremonial artifacts. Marcus Two Rivers, their head of security, stood over a digital map display. At his feet lay a black duffel bag that didn't belong in their territory. "We found this 10 miles south of the boundary line," Marcus reported, his expression grim. "Along with this," he handed John a phone with cartel markings. "They're getting bolder." John examined the phone, his face hardening. The Azteca Cartel had been pushing northward for months, but this was the first time they'd breached the clan's outer perimeter. The bag contained pure cocaine, high grade, worth millions. "And the carriers?" "Dead," Sarah answered, pulling up thermal imaging footage. "Not by us. Looks like cartel execution style. They're cleaning house, pushing into new territory. Our territory." John moved to the eastern window, watching his people go about their morning routines. Children headed to the community school. Elders gathered for their daily prayers, and beneath it all, warriors trained. The clan had lived in peace for generations, but they had never been defenseless. "They see what they want to see," John said finally, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "They look at our land and see isolation. They see our people and don't think we're vulnerable." He turned back to Sarah and Marcus. "They don't understand that we chose this isolation, that we've used it to preserve something they couldn't imagine." Sarah stepped forward, her hand resting on the ceremonial knife at her hip, a weapon that had tasted blood more recently than any outsider would guess. The young warriors are ready, Father. We've trained them as our ancestors trained us. And the defensive positions? John asked, though he already knew the answer. The clan had maintained their strategic preparations for centuries. Triple-checked, Marcus confirmed. Motion sensors hidden in traditional markers, surveillance disguised as wildlife cameras. We see everything that moves in our territory. John nodded, moving to the central fire pit where a sacred flame had burned uninterrupted for generations. He took a handful of blessed herbs and cast them into the flames, watching as the smoke carried their essence skyward. Prepare the council. Tonight, we perform the ceremony of the warrior's path. The cartel believes they're hunting sheep. Let them come and find the wolves. As Sarah and Marcus left to make preparations, John remained by the fire, his mind traveling back to the lessons his father had taught him. The Shadow Clan had survived conquest, disease, forced relocation, and countless threats by maintaining their warrior spirit while appearing peaceful to the outside world. Now, a new enemy approached, one that understood only violence and intimidation. They would learn, as others had learned before them, why the Cherokee were once feared across the continent. The cartel was about to discover that some wolves never lost their teeth. They just learned to smile. The sacred fire cast dancing shadows across the faces of 24 clan leaders gathered in the underground chamber. Centuries ago, their ancestors had used this same space to plan battles against those who threatened their people. Now the ancient walls witnessed another council of war. John Blackwolf stood at the center, his voice carrying the authority of generations. "What you're about to see," he said, nodding to Sarah, "confirms our worst fears." The modern display screen seemed out of place among the traditional totems, but the clan had long since learned to blend old ways with new technologies. Sarah stepped forward, bringing up satellite imagery. 3 cartel convoys have entered the outer territories. They're establishing supply lines. She switched to thermal imaging. Their forward camps are here, here, and here. We estimate 60 heavily armed men, with more arriving daily. Elder Mary Nighthawk, her silver hair reflecting the firelight, spoke first. "We have avoided outside conflict for 3 generations. Perhaps we could negotiate." "No." The word came from Thomas Running Bear, the clan's combat instructor. His face bore scars from battles few knew about. "I've seen what the Azteca Cartel did to the Navajo communities in New Mexico. They don't negotiate. They dominate or destroy." Marcus. 2 Rivers stepped into the firelight, carrying a bundle wrapped in ceremonial leather. "We recovered these from their scouts." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing military-grade weapons. "They're not just drug runners. These are professional killers." The chamber filled with murmurs as the elders examined the weapons. John raised his hand for silence. "Show them," he commanded Sarah. She clicked to another image, drone footage of a small Native American community in Arizona. Once peaceful, now a distribution hub for cartel operations. This was the Yellow River tribe 6 months ago. Those who resisted were killed. Those who survived wish they hadn't. John moved to the ancient war map carved into the eastern wall, its surface worn smooth by generations of planning fingers. Our ancestors didn't survive by being weak. The Shadow Clan's warriors didn't earn their reputation through peace alone. He turned to face the council. "We adapted, we learned, we kept the old ways sharp." Sarah activated another display, showing the clan's defensive preparations. Hidden bunkers dating back generations had been modernized. Ancient escape tunnels now housed security systems. Traditional hunting blinds concealed sniper positions. "We've trained for this," she said. "Every warrior in the clan knows both the old ways and modern combat." The memories of his own training flashed through John's mind. His father teaching him to move silently through the forest, to read the land, to strike from shadows. Those same lessons, refined and adapted, were now taught to every clan warrior. They learned traditional Cherokee hand-to-hand combat alongside modern close-quarters battle techniques, ancient tracking methods enhanced by thermal imaging. The wisdom of the past, empowering the weapons of the present. Elder Nighthawk stood, her opposition softening. The young ones, are they ready for what's coming? As if in answer, alarms silently flashed on their security displays. Sarah quickly brought up the feed. Through night vision cameras, they watched as 4 cartel scouts approached their outer markers. 2 young clan warriors, James Swift Arrow and Lisa Quiet Storm, moved like shadows through the trees. The council watched in silence as years of training manifested in lethal efficiency. The scouts never saw what hit them. Swift Arrow and Quiet Storm emerged from the darkness, their movements a fluid blend of ancient Cherokee combat techniques and modern military precision. In seconds, 3 scouts were unconscious. The 4th reached for his radio, only to find Quiet Storm's ceremonial blade at his throat. "That," John said into the stunned silence, "is what we've prepared for. Every warrior in the clan trains from childhood. We adapted our ancient combat arts, added new skills, stayed sharp." He gestured to the unconscious scouts on the screen. "Take them to the questioning place. Let's find out exactly what we're dealing with." The council's mood had shifted. Where there had been doubt, now determination took hold. These were not the peaceful natives the cartel expected to find. This was the Shadow Clan, whose warriors had never stopped training, whose children learned both the sacred dances and the art of war. Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The cartel has no idea what they're walking into. They see isolated land, limited numbers. They don't understand that every tree hides a warrior, every shadow conceals a blade." Sarah closed the displays, letting firelight reclaim the chamber. "Our ancestors chose this land for a reason. Every ridge, every valley, every cave system, they're all part of our defense. We've had centuries to prepare these grounds. The cartel thinks they're the predators." A cold smile crossed her face. "Let them come and learn differently." The council ended as it had for generations, with the warrior's prayer, ancient words echoing off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of Cherokee strength. As the elders departed, John remained by the fire with Sarah and Marcus, their minds turning to the battle ahead. "Send word to all our people," John commanded. "Starting tonight, we move to war footing. The cartel wants to see what kind of warriors they're facing." He looked at the weapons they'd captured, then to the ancient symbols of Cherokee power on the walls. "Let's show them." Dawn hadn't yet broken when the first shots echoed through the valley. Sarah Blackwolf was already awake, performing her morning weapons check when the security alert flashed across her tablet. Multiple breaches along the eastern perimeter, heavy vehicles, and gunfire near the river house, home to the Medicine Bear family. "They're testing us," she whispered, but her movements were anything but tentative as she grabbed her gear. Within seconds, she was patched into the clan's secure communication network. Marcus's voice crackled through her earpiece. 3 vehicles heavily armed. They've got Joseph Medicine Bear's family pinned down. Old Man's holding them off with his hunting rifle, but they're moving to surround the house. Sarah's jaw tightened. Joseph was 78, a respected elder who taught her the sacred bow hunting rituals. His granddaughter, Emma, was only 6. "Response teams, Swift Arrow and Quiet Storm are already moving into position. Your father's mobilizing the warrior units, but they won't make it in time." Sarah was already moving, her feet carrying her silently through the pre-dawn forest. She knew these paths like she knew her own heartbeat. "Keep them talking. I'm 3 minutes out." Through the tactical feed in her earpiece, she could hear the cartel's leader shouting demands in Spanish. Manuel Cortez, she recognized his voice from their intelligence briefings. Former Mexican Special Forces, now the Azteca Cartel's chief, enforcer. His reputation for brutality was legendary. "You have 1 minute to open this door." Cortez's accent was thick with contempt. "We just want to talk business, old man. Don't make this messy." Joseph's reply came in Cherokee, a warrior's defiance in every syllable. Sarah smiled grimly as she moved into position. Her grandfather had taught her those same words. This land drinks the blood of those who come uninvited. She reached the ridgeline overlooking the river house, just as the first explosion rocked the pre-dawn silence. The cartel had blown the front door. Sarah's night vision showed 6 men moving to enter, with 4 more covering the perimeter. Their weapons and movements confirmed Marcus's assessment. These weren't ordinary thugs. They were trained killers. The first scream split the air. Emma's voice. Something deep and ancient stirred in Sarah's blood. The same warrior spirit that had protected their people for centuries rose within her. Her first arrow took the nearest gunman in the throat before he could radio for help. Her second found the heart of the man covering the back door. Swift Arrow and Quiet Storm materialized from the shadows on the opposite side of the clearing, moving like spirits of vengeance. Their blades flashed in the dim light as they eliminated the perimeter guards with ruthless efficiency. No guns. The clan's warriors understood the value of silence. Inside the house, Cortez was shouting orders, demanding to know where the shots had come from. Sarah used his voice to track his position, then loosed an arrow through the blown-out doorway. A howl of pain told her she'd found her mark, though not fatally. "Phantasma!" one of the cartel men screamed. "They're everywhere," Sarah had to admire. In their training, they tried to establish a defensive position to fight back against enemies they couldn't see. But they were fighting on Cherokee land, against warriors who had spent lifetimes learning every shadow, every angle, every killing ground. The battle lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, 8 cartel soldiers lay dead or dying. 2 more, including Cortez, had managed to escape into the forest, leaving trails of blood for the clan's trackers to follow. Sarah found Joseph Medicine Bear standing in his ruined living room, his ancient rifle still smoking. Emma clung to his leg, her eyes wide but dry, already showing the strength that ran in their blood. The old man nodded to Sarah, speaking again in Cherokee. "The wolves have shown their teeth." She switched to her comm unit. "Secure the area. I want full documentation. They need to know exactly what happened here." She knelt before Emma, switching to English. "You were very brave, little one. Like a true warrior." The girl's chin lifted proudly. "I wasn't scared. Grandfather says our ancestors protect us." "That they do." Sarah stood as her father arrived with the main warrior unit. John Blackwolf surveyed the scene, his expression hardening as he saw the damage to the sacred house. "They tried to hurt one of our elders," he said quietly. "Threatened a child." Sarah nodded. "They learned." "No." John's voice carried the weight of centuries of Cherokee warfare. "Not yet, but they will." He turned to Marcus. "Track them. I want to know everything. Where they run to, who they talk to, every move they make. Cortez needs to understand that he didn't just attack a family. He attacked a nation." As the warriors secured the scene and began treating the wounded cartel soldiers, the clan's ethics demanded they care even for enemies. Sarah watched the sun rise over their ancestral lands. The cartel had drawn first blood, thinking they were attacking helpless natives. Instead, they'd awakened something ancient and deadly. Cortez had escaped with an arrow in his shoulder and a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The cartel would respond with greater force, thinking they could overwhelm the clan with numbers and firepower. They didn't understand that every warrior in the Shadow Clan had trained for this moment their entire lives. Let them come, she thought, feeling the weight of her bow, a weapon that bridged the ancient and modern worlds, just like her people. The Shadow Clan had survived centuries of threats by being smarter, faster, and deadlier than their enemies ever expected. The cartel was about to learn why. Smoke from sacred herbs drifted through the underground training chambers as 50 young warriors moved in perfect unison, their bodies flowing through combat forms that predated European contact. Sarah stood at the front, leading them through. The ancient sequences passed down through generations of Cherokee warriors. Each movement contained lethal purpose disguised as dance, each step a potential killing blow wrapped in ceremony. Our ancestors, she called out, her voice echoing off stone walls, didn't just fight, they became one with the battle. The warriors transitioned seamlessly from traditional forms to modern combat stances. They didn't just learn techniques, they became living weapons. Among the warriors, 16-year-old Michael Runningwolf caught her attention. His movements carried the same natural grace she'd seen in his father before a cartel bullet claimed him 3 days ago at the river house. The boy had refused to miss training, channeling his grief into perfecting every strike, every block. The cartel thinks they understand violence, Sarah continued, demonstrating a combination that merged a traditional Cherokee knife disarm with modern close-quarters combat. They think brutality equals strength. Our ways teach us differently. We strike not from hatred, but from duty, not from anger, but from necessity. The warriors paired off, practicing the combinations with ceremonial blades that had tasted real blood through centuries. The underground chamber rang with the clash of steel and controlled breathing. These were not children playing at war. They were the latest generation of a warrior culture that had never truly laid down its arms. Above them, through layers of earth and stone, the clan's preparations continued. John Blackwolf supervised as ancient defensive positions were reinforced with modern technology. Camera systems disguised as bird nests, motion sensors hidden in traditional boundary markers. Every advantage of the modern world integrated seamlessly into their traditional defenses. Marcus Two Rivers entered the training chamber, waiting respectfully at the edge until Sarah called a break. "The medicine bunkers are stocked," he reported. "Every warrior cache is supplied. Thomas Running Bear has the scout teams deployed in rotating shifts. We can see anything moving within 20 miles of our borders." Sarah nodded, watching Michael Runningwolf continue to practice, even as others rested. "And our guests? The captured cartel soldiers are secure. Our healers treated their wounds, as is our way, but they're talking. Cortez has called in reinforcements, professional mercenaries, cartel special forces. They're planning something big. Let them come," Michael Runningwolf said suddenly, his young voice carrying the steel of newfound purpose. "Let them see what we are." Sarah approached him, noting how he'd perfectly integrated the new techniques into his traditional training. "You understand what's coming? What it means to be a warrior of the clan?" The boy's eyes held a wisdom beyond his years. "My father died protecting our people. He died a warrior's death." His hands moved through another combination, smooth as flowing water. "I live a warrior's life." Sarah touched the ceremonial necklace she wore, turquoise and silver, that had been passed down through generations of clan warriors. She removed it, placing it around Michael's neck. Then, "Let's make sure you're ready to live it well." The afternoon progressed with intensive training. Modern weapons handling mixed with traditional tracking techniques, close-quarters battle tactics integrated with Cherokee stealth principles. The warriors moved between stations, from the archery range where they practiced with both traditional bows and modern compound weapons, to the technology center where they learned to operate the clan's surveillance systems. As the sun began to set, John Blackwolf called the entire clan together in the sacred gathering space. Hundreds of Cherokee stood in concentric circles around the central fire pit, warriors in the inner rings, families behind them, elders in positions of honor. The fire cast dancing shadows across faces that showed both determination and serenity. "Tonight," John's voice carried to every corner of the gathering, "we honor the old ways, not because we live in the past, but because our ancestors' wisdom lights our path forward." He gestured to where the younger warriors stood. "Look at our children. They carry smartphones and know how to operate drone cameras. They can hack computer systems and track satellite signals, but they also know how to move silently through the forest. They can read the land and speak to the spirits of our ancestors." Sarah stepped forward, her voice joining her father's. "The cartel thinks they're facing a simple tribe. They see our ceremonies and think we're stuck in the past. They don't understand that we've spent generations perfecting the art of being. Underestimated. A drum began to beat, the rhythm of the war dance. But this was not a historical reenactment. As the warriors moved through the ancient steppes, their modern weapons and tactical gear merged seamlessly with traditional face paint and ceremonial garb. They were living bridges between worlds, carrying the strength of their ancestors into a modern war. Michael Running Wolf stood among them, his father's ceremonial knife on one hip, a modern combat blade on the other. His movements spoke of both, grief and purpose, loss and determination. The firelight caught the turquoise of his new necklace as he joined the war dance, his young voice rising with the others in songs that had echoed through these mountains for centuries. As night fell, the clan dispersed to their positions. Warriors moved to their patrol routes, scouts to their observation posts, families to fortified safe houses. Sarah watched them go, feeling the weight of responsibility and the strength of tradition flowing through her veins. The cartel would come, bringing death with modern weapons and tactical training. They would find an enemy that had spent centuries preparing for moments like this, an enemy that had never forgotten how to fight, how to kill, how to protect what was theirs. They would find the Shadow Clan, and they would learn why their ancestors had given them that name. Moonlight filtered through the canopy as Sarah led her strike team through the forest. 20 warriors moved like shadows, their movements a perfect blend of ancient Cherokee stealth techniques and modern tactical formation. Each warrior wore a mix of traditional ceremonial paint and advanced combat gear. Their weapons ranged from ceremonial knives to suppressed modern rifles. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the cartel's forward operating base 200 meters ahead. Satellite imagery had shown 25 heavily armed men, but thermal scanning now revealed 32. They'd fortified an abandoned ranger station, turning it into a staging area for their push into Cherokee territory. "Overwatch in position," Marcus's voice whispered through her earpiece. His team of archers had taken up positions in the surrounding trees, their compound bows equipped with both traditional and modern arrows. "I count 8 on perimeter patrol, 4 in the guard towers." Sarah raised her fist, bringing the strike team to a halt. Michael Running Wolf crouched beside her, his young face set with determined focus. She'd chosen him specifically for this mission, his first real combat operation. Tonight would mark his transition from training to warfare. "Remember," she subvocalized into her throat mic, "this isn't about killing. This is about sending a message. We show them who they're dealing with." She switched to hand signals, directing teams to their positions. The cartel had set up decent security, but they were watching for modern military threats. They weren't prepared for warriors who could move through dense forest without disturbing a single leaf. The attack began with ancient Cherokee hunting whistles, calls that sounded exactly like local birds. The signals coordinated their movements as warriors melted through the perimeter defenses. 2 cartel guards disappeared silently, pulled into the underbrush without a sound. In the towers, sentries slumped quietly as arrows found their marks. With deadly precision, Sarah watched Michael closely as they approached the main building. His movements were perfect, showing no hesitation as he followed the practice drills they'd repeated countless times. When a guard rounded the corner, Michael's response was instinctive. The ceremonial knife moved in the exact arc they'd trained, finding nerve clusters that dropped the man without a sound. The cartel's first warning came as choreographed chaos erupted simultaneously across the compound. Smoke arrows launched by Marcus's team filled the area with a traditional Cherokee blend, a mixture that not only obscured vision but carried extracts that induced disorientation and confusion. Inside the main building, Sarah's team moved with lethal efficiency. Flashbang grenades, modified with Cherokee ceremonial herbs that enhanced their psychological impact, disoriented the cartel soldiers. Warriors moved through the smoke like spirits, their traditional face paint turning them into living shadows. "What the hell are they?" A cartel soldier screamed in Spanish, firing blindly at shapes that appeared and vanished. The clan's warriors had trained for this exact scenario, using the cartel's modern tactical responses against them. When they instinctively grouped together for security, it made them easier targets for the clan's coordinated attacks. Sarah moved through the chaos with fluid grace, her movements a deadly dance passed down through generations. She encountered a cartel lieutenant, one of Cortez's top men. He was good, she noted, as he managed to block her first 2 strikes. But he was trained for modern combat. He didn't understand the ancient Cherokee techniques that flowed into modern fighting. Forms. The battle ended in less than 6 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 28 cartel soldiers lay unconscious or wounded. None dead, a deliberate choice that Sarah knew would send a more potent message than a massacre. 4 had managed to escape into the forest, where Thomas running. Bear's trackers would follow them, ensuring they carried the story back to Cortez. "Secure the area," Sarah ordered, watching her warriors shift seamlessly from combat to control. "Tag their weapons with our markers, download their computers. I want Cortez to know exactly who did this." Michael Running Wolf stood at attention, his ceremonial knife cleaned and resheathed. The weapon had drawn its first blood in combat, marking his official transition to warrior status. Sarah saw both pride and solemnity in his eyes, the perfect balance of a Cherokee warrior. "Send the medicine team," she continued, watching as warriors began treating the wounded cartel soldiers. "Show them that we can heal as skillfully as we hunt." This too was part of Cherokee warfare, demonstrating not just strength, but wisdom and honor. As dawn approached, Sarah supervised the final stages of the operation. The captured cartel soldiers were bound with traditional Cherokee knots, their wounds treated with both modern medicine and ancient herbs. Each was marked with ceremonial, in paint, symbols that any cartel member would soon learn to fear. "Leave one vehicle intact," she ordered. "Let the runners take it back to Cortez. Make sure they can carry our message." She turned to Michael, who stood ready with ceremonial paint. On the vehicle's hood, he painted the clan's ancient symbol of warning, a mark that had struck fear into enemies for centuries. Marcus approached as they finished, his bow slung across his back. "Runners are being tracked. All data recovered. We found something interesting. Looks like Cortez is operating without full cartel approval. He's trying to prove himself by taking our territory." Sarah nodded, watching the sun rise over the mountains. "Then let's help him prove something very different." She switched to her command channel. "All units, withdraw. Leave no trace except what we choose to show." The warriors melted back into the forest as silently as they had emerged. Behind them, they left a scene that would shake the cartel's confidence. A fortified position penetrated without resistance. Elite soldiers defeated by enemies they never saw. Modern security undone by ancient skills. And on the hood of the remaining vehicle, the Cherokee warning symbol dried in the morning light. Soon, every cartel soldier would learn to fear that mark. They would learn that the Shadow Clan had earned its name through centuries of warfare, and that some enemies should never be awakened. As they moved through the forest, Sarah heard Michael singing softly, an ancient Cherokee victory song. Other warriors joined in, their voices carrying the weight of generations. They were the Shadow Clan, bridging worlds between ancient and modern, peace and war. And they were no longer hiding. Let Cortez come, Sarah thought. Let him bring his army. The Cherokee had faced worse enemies and survived. They had faced extinction and grown stronger. Now they would teach a new enemy why some tribes were never conquered. They were simply wise enough to wait for the right moment to strike. Sarah stood in the clan's archives, a secure room that blended modern technology with ancient record-keeping. On the screens before her, satellite images showed the destruction of native communities across the Southwest. Next to the displays, carefully preserved tribal records told stories of resistance and survival stretching back centuries. "The pattern is always the same," Marcus said, pulling up footage from Arizona. "Cortez doesn't just want territory. He wants to break people. The video showed the aftermath of the Yellow River tribe's resistance, burned homes, destroyed cultural sites, families torn apart. John Blackwolf entered silently, carrying a leather-bound journal. This isn't his first encounter with our people. He opened the journal, revealing entries from 15 years ago. Your mother wrote this before she died. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took the journal. Maria Blackwolf had been the clan's chief diplomat, working to build alliances between tribes. Her death in a supposed accident had never sat right with the clan. She was investigating cartel expansion even then, John continued, following their movement through tribal lands. The last entry. He fell silent, letting Sarah read for herself. The words hit her like physical blows. Her mother had tracked a young cartel officer who was developing a reputation for brutality against native communities. An ambitious man named Manuel Cortez. The journal's final entry detailed a planned meeting with him, an attempt to negotiate protection for vulnerable tribes. She never returned from that meeting. We couldn't prove anything, John said quietly. We didn't have the evidence then. But your mother, he touched the journal gently. She knew the risks. She died trying to protect our people. Sarah closed the journal, her voice steel. And now he's here, on our land. There's more, Marcus added, bringing up new intelligence. The cartel leadership isn't fully backing this operation. Cortez is acting with limited support, trying to prove himself worthy of advancement. He's chosen us as his demonstration. A bitter laugh escaped Sarah. He chose poorly. The archive's door opened again, admitting Elder Mary Nighthawk. The old woman's face carried grave concern. The morning patrols found this. She handed Sarah a ceremonial necklace, its turquoise stones stained with blood. 3 more communities have been attacked. Smaller tribes, those without our resources or training. Sarah recognized the necklace. It was traditional Navajo craftwork. Survivors? Some. They're requesting sanctuary. They carry stories. Mary's voice hardened. Cortez is being thorough, systematic. He's trying to erase everything that makes us who we are. John moved to the ancient maps on the wall, his fingers tracing the trade routes that had connected native peoples for centuries. Then we show him who we are, all of us. He turned to Sarah. Your mother believed in unity between tribes. Perhaps it's time to honor that belief. Sarah nodded slowly, an idea forming. The old alliances, the networks she helped build. She activated the communication system, modern technology carrying ancient relationships into the digital age. How many tribes can we reach? Dozens, Marcus replied. Many still honor the old bonds. Good. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard, sending encrypted messages through channels that had evolved from signal fires to satellite links. Cortez wants to prove himself by destroying native communities. Let's show him what native communities can do when we stand together. The responses began arriving within hours. Tribes across the region pledging support, sharing intelligence, offering resources. Many had suffered from cartel incursions. All remembered the old ways, the ancient pacts of mutual defense. In the training grounds below, Sarah watched Michael Running Wolf leading younger warriors through combat drills. The boy had grown since his first battle, carrying himself with the confidence of a tested warrior. More recruits had arrived from allied tribes, eager to learn the Shadow Clan's methods of resistance. Your mother would be proud, John said softly, joining her at the window. She believed our strength lay in unity. Sarah touched the journal, now secure in a pocket over her heart. Cortez doesn't understand what he's awakened. He sees divided tribes, easy targets. Her voice carried the weight of generations of warriors. He'll learn what our enemies have always learned too late, that we are one people, one spirit, one strength. Through the window, she watched as warriors from different tribes trained together, ancient combat techniques flowing into modern warfare. The Shadow Clan was no longer standing alone. They were becoming what they had always been meant to be, the spark that would ignite a fire Cortez couldn't hope to contain. "Send word to our allies," she commanded. "It's time to show the cartel why our ancestors were feared across continents, why our stories speak of warriors who could shake the earth." She lifted her mother's journal in a warrior's salute. "Let's remind them why some enemies are never meant to be made." The clan's surveillance drones captured the convoy's arrival at dawn, 5 black SUVs escorted by armored vehicles. Sarah watched the feed from the command center as dozens of men in tactical gear deployed with professional precision. These weren't cartel thugs. Their movement spoke of military training, likely former special forces from around the globe. "Cortez isn't taking chances anymore," Marcus observed, analyzing their equipment. "Latest gen night vision, thermal imaging, anti-drone tech. They're geared up for a serious counterinsurgency operation." Sarah zoomed in on their commander, a tall figure with a distinctive gait. "Ex-Spetsnaz," she noted. "I recognize him from intelligence briefings. Igor Volkov. He specializes in indigenous population suppression." "They're setting up forward bases," Thomas Runningbear reported, marking positions on the digital map. "Professional work, interlocking fields of fire, overlapping patrol routes. They're treating this like a military operation." Sarah smiled coldly. "Good. Let them think that's what they're facing." She switched to the clan's secure channel. "All units, protocol ghost dance. Fall back to secondary positions. Let them think we're retreating." The clan's warriors melted deeper into their territory, leaving subtle signs for the mercenaries to find. Broken branches, disturbed earth, traces that any trained tracker would follow. Every sign had been carefully planned, leading their enemies exactly where the clan wanted them. "They're good," Sarah admitted, watching the mercenaries advance methodically through their lands. "But they're fighting the last war. They're prepared for guerrilla warfare, for insurgency tactics." She touched the ancient war map carved into the cave wall. "They don't understand what they're really hunting." In the forests, clan warriors began implementing strategies refined over centuries of warfare. Traditional Cherokee hunting techniques, once used to track deer through dense forest, now helped them stalk mercenary patrols. Ancient methods of copying animal sounds carried signals that no radio could intercept. Michael Running Wolf led a youth team that specialized in psychological warfare. They deployed traditional Cherokee hunting spirits, carved wooden figures treated with phosphorescent compounds that seemed to glow in the darkness. Mental warfare had always been part of Cherokee military doctrine. The mercenaries' first losses came silently. Elite soldiers simply disappeared from patrol routes, their equipment later found arranged in ceremonial patterns that made hardened veterans wake screaming from nightmares. The clan's warriors moved like shadows through their own territory, using knowledge passed down through generations to turn the very land against their invaders. "They're adapting," Marcus reported 3 days into the operation, "switching to tight formations, never leaving anyone alone. Volkov's got them running strict protocols now." "Perfect," Sarah replied. She turned to Elder Mary Nighthawk, who had been consulting the ancient texts. "Are the preparations ready?" The old woman nodded gravely. "The sacred grounds are prepared. The spirits are awakened." She handed Sarah a pouch of traditional herbs. "Your ancestors hunt with you tonight." As darkness fell, the clan launched its true counterattack. Warriors coated in traditional paint that defeated thermal imaging moved through the forest. Their movements had been practiced since childhood, a perfect fusion of modern military tactics and ancient Cherokee hunting techniques. The mercenaries' night vision equipment betrayed them. The clan had prepared the ground with natural compounds that created false readings, making the forest itself seem alive with movement. Every technical advantage the mercenaries brought was turned against them by warriors who understood both the old ways and the new. Volkov's men found themselves fighting shadows that struck without warning and vanished without trace. Their military training told them to hold formation, to maintain discipline. But the night was filled with spirit calls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, with glimpses of painted warriors that disappeared like mist. Psychological warfare, Volkov barked through their comms. "Stay focused." But his men were facing something their training hadn't prepared them for. Warriors who moved like hunting spirits through the dark, who could track a man's footprints across solid rock, who seemed to emerge from the earth itself to strike. By midnight, the mercenaries had suffered no casualties, but were completely demoralized. Sarah's strategy wasn't to kill them, it was to break them, to show them that all their modern military training meant nothing against warriors who had spent centuries perfecting the art of forest warfare. "They're pulling back," Marcus reported with satisfaction. "Volkov's calling for extraction. Looks like they've had enough of hunting ghosts." Sarah watched through the drone feed as the mercenaries retreated, their professional discipline shattered by what they'd encountered. They would report back to Cortez, try to explain what they'd faced. But how could they describe warriors who moved without sound, who appeared and disappeared like smoke, who turned the forest itself into a weapon? "Send the message to our allies," she commanded. "Show them what we achieved here. Show them that the old ways still have power." Across the territory, Cherokee warriors emerged from the shadows, their faces painted with traditional symbols that had gained new meaning. They had faced modern military professionals and prevailed not through superior firepower, but through the perfect blend of ancient wisdom and modern adaptation. The storm was breaking, but not in the way Cortez had planned. He had hired mercenaries to crush what he thought was a simple tribal resistance. Instead, he had helped forge something far more dangerous, a fighting force that combined centuries of warrior tradition with modern tactical excellence. And this was just the beginning. The sacred burial grounds stretched across the valley floor, ancient stone markers rising from morning mist like silent guardians. Sarah stood with Elder Mary Nighthawk at the central circle, watching the old woman prepare traditional herbs and medicines. They both knew Cortez would come here next. The cartel's pattern was always the same: destroy what people held sacred, break their spirit before breaking their bodies. "Our ancestors chose this ground carefully," Mary said, her weathered hands moving through ceremonies unchanged by centuries. They knew that some places hold power that cannot be measured by modern tools. The clan's defenders had spent the night preparing the sacred ground, but not in ways the cartel would expect. Traditional blessing ceremonies merged with modern defense preparations. Warriors in full combat gear knelt to receive ancient war paint. Surveillance equipment was blessed with sage smoke before being positioned. Movement on the southern ridge. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "Large force. They're not trying to hide their approach." Sarah watched the drone feed as nearly 100 cartel soldiers advanced toward the burial grounds. Cortez himself led them, his arms still bandaged from their last encounter. His remaining mercenaries had been supplemented with cartel special forces, men chosen for brutality rather than skill. "They expect us to defend this ground," Sarah observed. "They're counting on it." "Of course we'll defend it," Mary replied calmly, finishing her preparations. "But not in the way they think. Our ancestors taught us that true strength flows from the spirit first." She handed Sarah a small pouch of sacred herbs. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The cartel force reached the edge of the burial grounds just as the sun broke through the morning mist. They moved with aggressive confidence, desecrating sacred markers, deliberately provoking a response. Cortez stood at their center, shouting challenges in Spanish. Sarah's voice carried across the clan's communication network. "Remember your training. Remember who you are. Remember whose ground you stand upon." Around the burial grounds, Cherokee warriors waited in positions that combined modern tactical advantage with ancient spiritual significance. The battle began with a sound that froze. The blood of every cartel soldier, the unified war cry of the Cherokee nation echoing from all directions at once. The clan's warriors had positioned themselves using the valley's natural acoustics, creating an effect that made their voices seem to come from the earth itself. Cortez's men opened fire, but the Cherokee were already moving. Young warriors like Michael Running Wolf demonstrated why they had earned their place, using the sacred grounds layout for perfect ambush positions. Every stone marker their ancestors had placed now provided cover for a new generation of defenders. Sarah led the central defense, her movements a deadly dance between the ancient stones. The sacred herbs Mary had prepared were put to use, smoke grenades filled with traditional mixtures that induced confusion and fear. The cartel soldiers found themselves fighting in a landscape that seemed alive with spirits, where every shadow held a warrior and every mist concealed death. Their breaking formation, Marcus called out. The cartel's neat military lines had dissolved into chaos. Men fired at shadows, at echoes, at things they swore they saw moving in the mist. The Cherokee warriors struck and vanished, their face paint and tactics making them seem like the spirits of vengeful ancestors. Cortez raged orders, trying to maintain control, but his men were facing something beyond their experience. This wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a clash between worlds. Modern military doctrine crumbled against warfare that blended physical and spiritual combat in ways that had been perfected over centuries. The turning point came when Michael Running Wolf led his youth squad in a flanking maneuver that cut off Cortez's command position. The young warriors moved like hunting spirits through the mist, their ceremonial blades finding gaps in modern body armor. Not killing, the clan's orders were clear, but delivering wounds that would leave scars to remember them by. Sarah herself reached Cortez, their confrontation taking place at the heart of the burial grounds. His modern combat training met her lifetime of Cherokee warrior preparation. For a moment, they fought hand-to-hand between the ancient stones before. Sarah's ceremonial knife opened a long cut across his face, a mark that would remind him of this day forever. The cartel forces broke and ran, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and any pretense of military discipline. They fled from warriors who seemed to phase through solid stone, from smoke that made them see their worst fears, from a people whose connection to their sacred land transformed them into something beyond ordinary soldiers. As the sun burned away the last of the mist, Sarah stood with her warriors among the sacred markers. Not one stone had been damaged. Not one grave had been disturbed. The ancestors' ground had been defended not just with modern weapons, but with the spiritual strength that had kept the Cherokee nation alive through centuries of threats. Mary Nighthawk moved among the warriors, blessing them with traditional herbs, treating wounds with both modern medicine and ancient remedies. "The ancestors are pleased," she said simply. "You fought as true Cherokee warriors, protecting what is sacred with both strength and wisdom." Sarah looked out over the burial grounds, feeling a deep connection to every warrior who had defended this earth before her. Cortez had tried to break their spirit by attacking their sacred places. Instead, he had learned why these grounds were sacred. They were places of power, where the strength of the past flowed into the warriors of the present. The message would spread through the cartel's ranks. The Shadow Clan didn't just fight with modern weapons. They fought with the accumulated power of centuries, with the strength of their ancestors, with a spiritual force that no amount of military training could overcome. The sacred grounds were quiet once more, but they had added a new story to their ancient history, a story of how the old ways and the new had come together, how a new generation of Cherokee warriors had proved worthy of their inheritance. And somewhere in the morning mist, the ancestors smiled. The first sign of betrayal came in the dead of night. Sarah was reviewing security footage when the clan's defensive systems went dark. One by one, cameras failed, motion sensors stopped responding, and communication channels filled with static. This wasn't battle damage or technical failure. This was deliberate sabotage. "Marcus!" She keyed her backup radio, an old system kept separate from their main network. No response. The command center's doors were sealed, another security feature turned against them. Through reinforced windows, she saw flashlights moving across the compound. Too many, too coordinated. Her tablet flickered to life with a single message: "You should have negotiated." The sender's ID made her blood run cold. Thomas Running Bear, their combat instructor, the man who had trained half their warriors. The attack came from both outside and inside. Cartel forces breached the perimeter through gaps in their security, guided by intimate knowledge of their defenses. Warriors who should have been on guard duty were nowhere to be found. The clan's carefully planned defense was unraveling from within. "All units code black," Sarah broadcast on the emergency channel. "Internal compromise. Rally points are burned." She slammed her palm against the biometric lock, finally gaining access to the weapons cache. The sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the Elder's quarters. John Blackwolf's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Sarah, they're heading for the sacred archives." "Thomas is—" The transmission cut off with the sound of breaking glass and cursing in Spanish. Sarah moved through the darkened compound, her mind racing. Thomas had access to everything: patrol schedules, defensive positions, emergency protocols. How long had he been feeding information to Cortez? How many of their recent losses had been carefully orchestrated? She encountered the first cartel team outside the training hall. Their movements showed they knew the layout perfectly, but they didn't expect the modifications Sarah had quietly made over the past week. Her mother's journal had taught her well: trust, but prepare for betrayal. The fight was brief and brutal. Sarah's ceremonial blade found gaps in their formation that Thomas hadn't known to warn them about. She left them unconscious, their weapons disabled, and moved toward the archives. If Thomas was truly working with Cortez, that's where the real target would be. Michael Running Wolf found her in the corridor, his young face streaked with blood and war paint. "Elder Mary is secure," he reported tersely, "but they've got Marcus. Thomas, he used the training protocols against us." Some of the younger warriors were confused, didn't know who to trust. An explosion rocked the compound, the armory. "He's destroying our weapons," Sarah realized, "trying to force a surrender." She keyed her emergency beacon, activating protocols that even Thomas didn't know about. Throughout the territory, hidden caches of weapons and supplies would now be accessible to loyal warriors. They reached the archive entrance in time to see Thomas emerging with an armful of sacred documents and computer drives. John Blackwolf lay crumpled against the wall, blood seeping from a chest wound. Cortez stood over him, a satisfied smile on his scarred face. "Family reunion," Cortez sneered. "Your father was surprised, Sarah. He trusted Thomas completely, just like your mother trusted me all those years ago." The pieces clicked into place. Thomas's betrayal hadn't started recently. He had been Cortez's asset for years, placed inside the clan after Maria Blackwolf's murder. A long game, finally reaching its end game. "You were right about one thing," Thomas added, his voice carrying none of the warmth that had mentored generations of warriors. "The old ways matter, but you can't fight progress. The cartel is the future. Better to adapt and survive than die clinging to the past." Sarah's response was a war cry that shook dust from the ceiling. Michael moved like lightning, exactly as Thomas had trained him, but with a variation that Sarah had secretly taught him. His ceremonial knife knocked the documents from Thomas's hands while Sarah engaged Cortez. The battle that followed would be told in clan stories for generations. Student against teacher, ancient combat forms evolved in real time as Sarah countered techniques that Thomas himself had taught her. Cortez fought with military precision, but found himself facing warriors who had adapted their training specifically to counter his methods. The tide turned when Marcus arrived with a group of loyal warriors, having fought free of their restraints. Thomas's arrogance had blinded him. He'd trained these warriors too well, taught them to think independently, to adapt. Now those lessons worked against him. But victory came at a terrible price. John Blackwolf's wound was severe, and Thomas managed to escape with some of the sacred documents. Worse, the clan's security was compromised at every level. They would have to abandon protocols developed. over generations, create new methods of defense while under active attack. As dawn broke over the wounded compound, Sarah knelt by her father in the medical bay. The healers worked with both modern medicine and traditional methods, fighting to save the clan's chief. Outside, loyal warriors were already adapting, establishing new security measures, identifying compromised positions. "He was my friend," John whispered through the pain. "Since we were boys, I never thought—" Sarah gripped her father's hand. "The clan survived worse. We'll survive this." Her other hand clutched her mother's journal. "Thomas forgot something important. He taught us to adapt, to evolve. Now we'll adapt past him." Marcus entered with fresh intelligence. Cortez is consolidating his gains, using the stolen documents to plan his next moves, but he doesn't have everything. The deepest archives, the most sacred knowledge, it's still secure. Good. Sarah stood, her decision made. Sound the ghost dance protocol. We retreat into the deep territories, abandon the compromised positions. Let them think Thomas's betrayal. Brocus. Her eyes held a fire that made even hardened warriors step back. What they'll learn is that betrayal doesn't weaken the clan. It burns away weakness and leaves us stronger. As warriors mobilized for strategic retreat, Sarah looked over their ancestral lands. Thomas had taught her that modern warfare was about adaptation. He was right, but not in the way he thought. The Shadow Clan would adapt, evolve, become something even their enemies couldn't predict. The price had been high, but the lesson was learned. Now, the real war would begin. Deep in the ancient cave systems beneath their territory, the Shadow Clan regrouped. These caves had been their fallback position for centuries, used by their ancestors during the darkest times of their history. Now they served again as a fortress, a place to heal and rebuild. Sarah stood in the central chamber, surrounded by maps both ancient and modern. John Blackwolf lay in the medical bay carved into the rock, traditional healers working alongside modern medical equipment to save his life. The betrayal had shaken the clan to its core, but Sarah saw something in her warrior's eyes that Thomas hadn't counted on, not defeat, but a cold, focused rage. "Report," she commanded as Marcus entered with the latest intelligence. Thomas gave them our primary playbook, but not everything. The oldest tunnels, the secret caches from before his time, those are still secure. Marcus laid out a tablet showing thermal imaging of cartel forces above. "They're trying to track us, but these caves don't appear on any modern survey. Thomas never knew about them." Elder Mary Nighthawk approached, her ancient wisdom now more valuable than ever. "Your grandfather showed you the old ways," she reminded Sarah, "the paths that even Thomas wasn't trusted with. The time has come to use them." Sarah nodded, remembering lessons learned in childhood. Her grandfather had insisted on teaching her secrets passed down through their bloodline, preparations for disasters exactly like this. "Gather the warriors," she ordered. "It's time they learned what it truly means to be Shadow Clan." In the depths of the cave system, Sarah assembled their remaining force. Young warriors like Michael stood alongside veterans, their faces illuminated by ancient torches and modern tactical lights. The betrayal had forced them to abandon many modern tools, but Sarah saw opportunity in their loss. "Thomas thinks he gave Cortez our strength," she began, her voice echoing off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of Cherokee resilience. "He taught them our techniques, our tactics, our modern adaptations, but he forgot something crucial." She touched the cave wall, feeling the energy of countless generations. "He forgot why we are called the Shadow Clan." From her pack, she withdrew her mother's journal and a set of even older documents, teachings passed down through her family line, never shared with the general clan membership. Our ancestors didn't just adapt to survive. They learned to become something else entirely, something that even our own people sometimes forgot we could be. Over the next hours, Sarah began teaching techniques that hadn't been used in generations. Ways of moving that made warriors nearly invisible, methods of fighting that seemed to defy physical laws. These weren't just combat techniques. They were the deepest secrets of their warrior culture, preserved by a select few for moments. Exactly like this, Michael proved especially adept at the ancient arts. "It's like the shadows themselves guide your movements," he said after successfully completing a particularly challenging sequence. Other warriors nodded in agreement, feeling their connection to their ancestors growing stronger with each passing hour. Marcus entered with urgent news. "Cortez is frustrated. The techniques Thomas taught them, they're not working like they expected. It's like they only got half the picture." "Less than half," Sarah smiled grimly. "Thomas taught discipline, technique, modern adaptation. But the true strength of the Shadow Clan was never in our methods." She gestured to the warriors around her, each now moving with a new fluidity that seemed almost supernatural. "It was in our spirit, in our connection to this land, in secrets, passed down through blood and bone. The transformation of the clan over the next day was remarkable." Warriors who had relied on modern technology now learned to navigate by ancient signs, carved so subtly into the cave walls that only those who knew to look for them could see them. Combat techniques evolved into something that blended physical reality with spiritual power. "Your father's condition is stabilizing," Elder Mary reported as the second day in the caves drew to a close. "The old medicines combined with modern treatment. He's fighting hard." Sarah knelt by her father's bedside. John Blackwolf's eyes opened briefly, focusing on his daughter. "You look like your mother," he whispered. "She would be proud. You remembered what matters most." "Rest," Sarah told him softly. "Save your strength. The clan needs its chief." "The clan," John managed a weak smile, "has its chief already." As if to confirm his words, a young warrior rushed in with news. Cortez's forces had found one of their decoy positions, a trap laid using their old tactics, exactly as Thomas would have expected. But when they moved to exploit this supposed weakness, they found nothing but shadows and whispers. "They're starting to fear us," Marcus observed, "not as fighters, but as something else, something they can't understand or predict." Sarah stood at the cave's hidden entrance, looking out over their ancestral lands. Thomas had revealed their secrets, thinking he had given Cortez the key to destroying the Shadow Clan. Instead, he had forced them to become something more powerful, to reach back to older, deeper secrets that no betrayal could compromise. "Send word to our allies," she commanded. "Tell them to watch for our sign. The Shadow Clan is about to remind our enemies why some tales of our people were spoken only in whispers." In the depths of the cave, warriors continued their transformation, becoming something that even Thomas, with all his knowledge of their modern methods, would not recognize. The Shadow Clan was returning to its roots, becoming again what they had been in their most legendary days, and soon Cortez would learn that some betrayals don't weaken their targets, they only reveal their true strength. The blood moon rose over the mountains, casting a crimson glow across the gathering of warriors. In the sacred cave chamber, hundreds of fighters from allied tribes stood in concentric circles around the central fire pit. Their faces were painted, with symbols so ancient that even the elders knew them only from stories. Marks of power that hadn't been used since the darkest days of their people's history. Sarah moved through the final preparations, her own face bearing the sacred marks of leadership, patterns that had been revealed in the deepest part of her mother's journal, passed down through generations of Blackwolf women. John watched. From his healing bed, propped up by Elder Mary, his eyes filled with pride as his daughter completed the ancient rituals. "The spirits are restless tonight," Mary observed, casting blessed herbs into the fire. "They know what comes with the dawn." Marcus entered the chamber, his tactical gear now adorned with traditional Cherokee symbols of protection. "Cortez is gathering his forces. Thomas has convinced him to commit everything. Over 200 men, heavy weapons, even helicopter. Support." He paused, scanning the intelligence on his tablet. "They think they know exactly where to hit us." "Good," Sarah's smile was fierce in the firelight. Let them come with all their strength. Let them think Thomas's knowledge gives them power over us. She turned to address the gathered warriors, her voice carrying the weight of generations. Tonight, we become what our ancestors truly were. The war ritual began with drums, not the traditional ceremonial rhythms that Thomas would have taught their enemies to expect, but deeper, older patterns that seemed to vibrate through bone and blood. Warriors moved in formations that defied normal combat doctrine, their movements guided by something beyond physical training. Michael Running Wolf led the younger warriors through the final preparations, their bodies painted with compounds that would defeat both thermal imaging and night vision. But these weren't just tactical preparations. Each mixture had been blessed with ceremonies that went back centuries, empowered by beliefs that predated European contact. The modern world forgot something important, Sarah told her warriors. As they made ready, they think our ceremonies are just traditions, that our beliefs are just stories. They forgot that some powers are real, that some grounds are truly sacred, that some warriors can become more than just flesh and blood. Throughout the cave system, final positions were taken, but these weren't the defensive positions that Thomas would expect. The Shadow Clan had become something else during their days in the ancient caves. They had remembered older ways of fighting, older ways of moving, older ways of striking fear into their enemies' hearts. Elder Mary approached Sarah with a final blessing. "Your mother knew this day would come," she said softly, painting the last sacred symbol on Sarah's forehead. "She left signs for you, prepared you to lead this renewal. The clan needed to remember what it truly is." Messages arrived from allied tribes throughout the region. They had seen the blood moon, recognized the ancient sign. Warriors who had trained with the Shadow Clan over the past weeks moved into position, ready to remind their enemies why native peoples had been feared as much as respected. "Thomas thinks he gave them our secrets," Marcus said, checking his weapons one last time. "But all he gave them was the surface, the modern adaptations. He never knew what really makes the Shadow Clan different." Sarah nodded, feeling the power of the ancient cave system thrumming through her body. These weren't just hiding places. They were seats of power, places where the barrier between physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. Their ancestors had chosen this territory for reasons that went far beyond tactical advantage. "When dawn comes," she told her warriors, "Cortez and Thomas will throw everything they have at us. They'll expect us to fight like the warriors they think they know." Her smile was dangerous in the firelight. "Instead, we'll show them what we really are. Why our enemies once spoke of us in whispers, why some clans were feared even by other warriors." The night deepened as final preparations were made. Warriors took their positions, their movements now carrying an almost supernatural grace. The sea. Caves seemed to pulse with ancient power, responding to ceremonies that hadn't been performed in generations. Just before dawn, Sarah stood with Michael and Marcus at the central chamber. "Whatever happens," she told them, "remember that we're fighting for more than land or pride. We're fighting to remind the world that some powers never died, that some warriors never forgot the old ways." The first light of dawn would bring war, but as the blood moon set and the warriors of the Shadow Clan made ready, they knew they had already achieved something remarkable. They had become something that no betrayal could defeat, something that no modern force could fully understand. They had become legend again. And legends, as their enemies were about to learn, could be very dangerous things indeed. First light revealed an empty valley. Cortez's forces moved in tactical formation, guided by Thomas's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Helicopter gunships circled overhead, their thermal imaging showing nothing but cold stone and morning mist. Everything was exactly as Thomas had predicted. The clan would fall back to their defensive positions, rely on the strategies he'd helped develop. "They're running scared," Thomas told Cortez, studying the tactical display. "All their fallback positions are exactly where I said they'd be." He pointed to the cave systems marked on their maps. "The main force will be here, trying to protect their elders and supplies. Cortez nodded to his assault teams. Move in. No survivors this time. But as the cartel forces advanced into the valley, something changed. The morning mist began to move against the wind. Warriors seemed to step out of solid rock, their bodies painted with symbols that played havoc with both human eyes and electronic sensors. The attack force found themselves facing enemies that moved like smoke, that struck from impossible angles. Sarah watched from her position as the first phase of their plan unfolded. These weren't the tactics Thomas had taught them. These were older ways of fighting, movements passed down through her family line, techniques that hadn't been seen in generations. "They're splitting up," Marcus reported through their new communication system, a combination of traditional Cherokee signals and modern tech that Thomas knew nothing about. "Just like you said they would. Thomas is leading a team toward the false command center." Sarah's smile was cold in the dawn light. "Good. Michael, are your warriors in position?" The young warrior's voice was steady. "Yes, Chief. We're ready." The battle unfolded like a deadly dance. Cartel soldiers found themselves fighting shadows that seemed to appear and vanish at will. Their night vision equipment showed impossible readings. Warriors that seemed to fade in and out of existence, heat signatures that made no sense, movements that defied normal human limitations. Thomas led his strike team confidently toward what he thought was the clan's command center. But as they entered the cave system, something was wrong. The tunnels had changed. Passages that should have been there weren't. Rock walls seemed to shift and move in the darkness. "Impossible," he muttered, checking his maps again. "These tunnels, they were never here before." "That's because you never knew our true secrets, brother." Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You taught them our modern ways, but you forgot why we are called the Shadow Clan." The attack came from all directions. Warriors moved through solid stone as if it were mist, their ceremonial blades finding gaps in modern body armor. Thomas's men fell to enemies they couldn't track, couldn't predict, couldn't fight. These weren't the warriors he had trained. These were something else, something older and far more dangerous. Sarah emerged from the shadows to face her former mentor. Thomas raised his weapon, but found himself unable to track her movements. She seemed to flow like water, her attacks coming from angles that shouldn't have been possible. "Your mother," Thomas spat, blocking a strike that should have broken his arm. "She was just like you, wouldn't listen to reason, couldn't see that. The old ways were holding us back." "No!" Sarah's blade traced the ancient symbol for justice across his chest. "She saw what you really were. A man who thought power only comes from the barrel of a gun." Her next strike disarmed him with a technique he had never seen. "She taught me that true strength comes from remembering who we are." Throughout the cave system, the battle turned into a rout. Cortez's forces found themselves fighting an enemy that had transformed into something beyond their understanding. Warriors moved like living shadows, striking with supernatural precision. The very earth seemed to fight against the invaders, as ancient traps and defenses activated in ways Thomas had never known existed. Michael led his young warriors in attacks that seemed to defy physics. They appeared from solid rock, struck with devastating force, and vanished again. The training Sarah had given them went beyond physical combat. They had become living embodiments of their ancestors' most powerful fighting arts. "What are you?" Thomas gasped, as Sarah's attacks drove him back step by step. "We are what we always were," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We are the Shadow Clan. We are the warriors that other warriors feared. We are the ones who never forgot the old powers." The final strike came with both physical and spiritual force. Thomas fell, not just defeated, but broken by the realization of what he had awoken. He had thought he knew the clan's strength, thought he could defeat them by revealing their secrets. Instead, he had forced them to become something far more powerful, to remember powers and abilities that went beyond modern understanding. As dawn fully broke over the valley, Sarah stood over her fallen mentor. The battle wasn't over. Cortez still commanded a significant force. But the cartel soldiers were already retreating, their confidence shattered by what they had witnessed. They had come expecting to fight a simple tribal force. Instead, they had found themselves facing warriors out of legend. "Take him to the sacred circle," Sarah commanded. "Let him witness what his betrayal has created. Let him see what the Shadow clan truly is." The morning mist swirled around them as warriors emerged from stone and shadow, their ancient paint glowing with power that Thomas had never known existed. They had become something that no betrayal could defeat, something that no modern weapon could overcome. They had become legend again, and the battle was far from over. Thunder rolled across the valley as Cortez rallied his remaining forces. The cartel commander stood atop a ridge, watching his men retreat from shadows that seemed to move with purpose, from warriors who appeared and vanished like smoke. Thomas's capture had shaken their confidence, but Cortez wasn't finished. He had not come this far to be defeated by tribal superstition. "Form up!" he commanded, his voice carrying over the tactical radio. "They're just men. Use the heavy weapons. Burn them out." But as his forces regrouped, something changed in the air. The morning mist began to glow with an inner light, and from the sacred caves emerged a figure that made hardened cartel soldiers step back in instinctive fear. John Blackwolf walked into battle, his wounds healed by powers Cortez couldn't understand. Behind him came warriors moving in formations that seemed to bend reality itself. "You forgot something important." John's voice carried across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. "You forgot why conquerors never fully defeated us. Why our enemies learned to fear the night." His war paint blazed with ancient power as he advanced. "You forgot that some tribes never lost their old magic." Sarah coordinated the clan's movements from the shadows, watching her father demonstrate why he had been chief for so long. John hadn't just healed, he had connected with something ancient and powerful. His movements were those of a much younger man, enhanced by knowledge and power passed down through countless generations. Cortez's men opened fire with everything they had. Helicopters strafed the ground with heavy-caliber rounds, but the Shadow Clan had become something beyond physical. Warriors flowed around bullets like water, their movements guided by powers that modern weapons couldn't touch. The very earth seemed to rise in their defense, as sacred grounds awakened to protect their guardians. Michael Running Wolf led a strike team that seemed to emerge from the air itself. Young warriors who had completed their transformation into something legend once called spirit walkers. They moved through solid objects, struck from impossible angles, disappeared and reappeared at will. The cartel soldiers found themselves fighting enemies that defied every law of physics they knew. "What are you?" Cortez screamed, emptying his weapon at a warrior who simply wasn't there when the bullets arrived. "We are what we have always been," John replied, advancing steadily through the gunfire. "We are the people your ancestors feared to face at night. We are the warriors who could walk through shadows and dance with spirits." The battle reached its peak as John and Cortez finally met in direct combat. The cartel leader's modern military training met techniques that predated European contact. His strikes, perfect in form, passed through opponents who turned to mist. His tactical positioning meant nothing against warriors who could step through solid stone. Sarah watched as her father demonstrated the full power of their bloodline. John moved like living shadow, his attacks enhanced by spiritual energy that made the air itself crackle with power. Cortez found himself fighting not just a man, but generations of warrior knowledge given physical form. "Your kind always make the same mistake," John said, as Cortez's desperate attacks met only air. "You think because we adapted to the modern world, we forgot our old strengths. You think because we learned to use technology, we lost our ancient power." His next strike sent Cortez's weapons flying. "We never forgot. We were just waiting for the right moment to remember." Throughout the valley, the cartel forces broke and ran. They had come expecting to fight simple tribal warriors. Instead, they found themselves facing the stuff of legend, Fighters who could become living shadow, who could move through solid objects, who could turn the very earth against their enemies. The final confrontation came as thunder shook the sacred grounds. Cortez, his modern certainties shattered, faced the combined power of the Shadow Clan. John Blackwolf stood with Sarah at his side, their warriors moving in patterns that made reality itself seem to bend. The very air hummed with energy that had been gathering for generations, waiting for this moment. "Your empire is built on breaking things," John told the defeated cartel leader. "Breaking lands, breaking people, breaking spirits. But some things can't be broken." His hands moved in patterns that made the air itself glow. Some powers only grow stronger when you try to destroy them. The combined spiritual energy of the clan manifested in a display that would be remembered for generations. The sacred grounds blazed with inner light as centuries of preserved power were unleashed. Cortez and his remaining men found themselves facing not just warriors, but the combined strength of ancestors who had never truly left their sacred lands. When it was over, Cortez knelt in defeat, his empire broken not by superior firepower or modern tactics, but by powers he had never believed could exist. The Shadow Clan stood victorious, their transformation complete. They had become what they were always meant to be, living bridges between the ancient and modern worlds, keepers of powers that the outside world had forgotten could exist. "Remember this," Sarah told the defeated cartel leader. "Remember what you found when you thought you were hunting simple tribes. Remember why our ancestors were feared and respected." Her warriors moved around her like living shadows, their power now undeniable. "Remember that some enemies are never meant to be made." Dawn broke fully over the valley as the last cartel forces fled. The Shadow Clan had not just won a battle, but they had reclaimed their deepest nature, had become again the warriors of legend that had protected these lands for centuries. They had reminded the world why some tribes were never truly conquered, why some powers never truly faded. They had become legend once more. And legends, as their enemies had learned, were far more real and far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. The sacred fire burned high as the Shadow Clan gathered for the victory ceremony. Thomas knelt before the Council of Elders, his former students standing guard. The betrayer's face showed not just defeat, but a deeper understanding of what he had awakened and lost. John Blackwolf, fully healed by ancient medicine and spiritual power, pronounced judgment. "You chose to betray not just our tactics, but our trust. Yet even in betrayal, you served the clan. You forced us to remember who we truly are." The ceremony ended with Thomas being escorted to tribal authorities. He would face justice not just for betrayal, but for his role in Maria Blackwolf's death years ago. His final glimpse of the clan showed him warriors who had transcended his teachings, becoming something he had never imagined possible. The morning after victory brought renewal. Allied tribes gathered to witness the Shadow Clan's transformation. What had begun as a defense against cartel invasion had become a spiritual awakening that spread through native communities across the region. Sarah stood with her father at the sacred marker stones, watching young warriors practice their new abilities. Michael Running Wolf led training sessions that blended modern combat with ancient powers. The clan had not just survived, they had evolved into something stronger than ever before. "Your mother would be proud," John told her softly. "She always said we needed to remember our true strength." Word spread through the underworld about what had happened in Cherokee territory. The cartel's defeat became legend. Stories of warriors who could walk through walls, who could vanish like smoke, who could turn the very earth against their enemies. Other criminal organizations learned to give tribal lands a wide berth. The Shadow Clan used their victory to strengthen ties between tribes, sharing their rediscovered knowledge with trusted allies. A new network of native warriors emerged, protecting their lands with both modern methods and ancient powers that had never truly been lost. Sarah's leadership style, honored both tradition and progress. Under her guidance, the clan developed new ways to preserve their secrets while adapting to the modern world. They remained hidden in plain sight, their true nature known only to those who shared their blood and honor. 1 month after the battle, Cortez sat in a maximum security prison, his empire in ruins. His debriefing to federal authorities was deemed too fantastic to be credible. Who would believe stories of tribal warriors wielding supernatural powers? But in the mountains, the Shadow Clan continued their vigilant watch. Their territory remained protected by powers older than written history. Their warriors moved like living shadows through ancient forests, guarding secrets that the modern world had forgotten could exist. Sarah stood at the boundary stone marking their territory, watching the sunset. The ceremonial paint on her face glowed faintly with inner power as she renewed the ancient warnings. This land was protected by forces beyond modern understanding, by warriors who had remembered their true nature. Let all enemies remember, she thought, touching the marker stone that now pulsed with renewed energy. Some tribes were never conquered because they never forgot what they truly were. The Shadow Clan had awakened fully, bridging ancient and modern worlds, ready to protect their people for generations to come. In the gathering dusk, warriors moved, like spirits through the trees, their forms shifting between solid and shadow. They were the guardians that legend had spoken of, the protectors that enemies learned to fear. They were the Shadow Clan, and their true power had only begun to manifest. The warning remained, written in ways both ancient and new. Some lands were sacred for reasons beyond human understanding. Some warriors never lost their ancient powers, and some enemies were never, ever meant to be made.